Hi, everybody. It's a forecaster here reporting in. I want to give you an update for the end of August. Today is August the 31st, 2014. It's Labor Day weekend, Sunday evening. I want to give you an update about what's likely to happen long term on Ebola and the current situation. You can go back into our predictions, which have been very accurate, by the way, across a variety of trend topics. And you can see that we've done an accurate job predicting things, including the Ebola playout, based on what happens. We predicted this would likely be turning into a pandemic, and that was even back in July. That basically the quarantines were not being done in an effective way, and the drastic measures that were needed to contain it were not being done. We made a list of recommendations on what kind of drastic measures and effective quarantines would need to be done, and that's only been partially implemented. The quarantines that have been put in place are obviously ineffective, and they're not being very well enforced. They simply don't have the resources, for one thing, especially supplies and equipment. So we haven't, the first world countries, the developed countries, haven't been able to help out the West African people in a significant enough way to help them contain this thing very well. The outcomes that we see on this thing long term, they're rather drastic. One, either we contain it properly with a quarantine and drastic measures, which simply, the thing is not on track right now for that to happen. So we don't see that really happening. The other is that we get a vaccine, a serum, or some sort of medical, biomedical type cure to deal with Ebola. And this could be ZMapp or something similar to it in a similar vein. I need to learn how to spell similar. S-I, similar, I think that's how you spell it. Sorry about the typo. Then the other option is if this is not able to contain it or significantly curtail Ebola, combined with a quarantine to reduce it, we're then looking at a global pandemic. This will spiral out in a bad way. It could be a very large mass die-off, population reduction type event. Likely what would happen is a combination of multiple of these outcomes, some of both. We think right now the most likely thing will be a combination of 2 and 3. Once this thing gets a hold in too many places, the ability to have an effective quarantine is reduced. And we think that we're close to being past that point due to the number of countries that it's in. And certainly once it goes pandemic, quarantining it, the effectivity of a quarantine is much lower once it's jumped between multiple towns or villages, which it's kind of jumped the shark in that way anyway. In addition, we haven't taken the full drastic measures. So we really think it's past, kind of this option is closing. The best thing we can do as far as quarantining is quarantine it within Africa. And that's going to take a major concerted effort to seal off the continent and the flights and all that, and just to have one-way trips of supplies over to Africa. Politically, it's going to be painful to do. And I see that as we won't be able to enforce that, frankly, because we don't have the political will to, not because we couldn't, because the political will is lacking. So what do? We got a vaccine or a serum or a global pandemic. Global pandemic, again, casualty rates, the death rate on Ebola, it's important to know, is between 50 or 60% at the low end and 90% at the high end. That's a major number of people dying. If we get a vaccine or serum that works, then that's going to be part of the solution, and that could really turn the tide dramatically. Again, I see a combination of these two things playing out because the vaccine is politically convenient. They can make a lot of money off of it. The governments don't have to enforce a very politically unpopular and painful quarantine situation, which they don't have the political will to do, or the kind of leadership needed to do it. So watch for these two events to likely play out here. This thing's going to spread out of control like crazy. Again, given that they won't quarantine it properly, and we're looking at this. Let's just look at a couple things here. There's the CDC. They're doing very limited things to help in this situation. They're doing some things, but it's pretty limited. There's the WHO. They claim at the WHO that somehow at 20,000 people will die from it, and then miraculously Ebola is going to stop spreading. I say if it gets to that point, for sure it's jumped the shark, and we don't have a quarantine. And the only way he's going to stop it at that point is they get a major serum. You guys, another question: how did this serum, the vaccine ZMapp, come about so quickly? I mean, it was very shortly after this outbreak started that we saw ZMapp and the vaccine suddenly just come out of nowhere. And normally on these very scary, Ebola's been around since like the 70s. And suddenly they've got a potential, vaccine or serum for it. You got to ask what's going on, like what's up. It's pretty serious. And so that's something you got to look at, like what's going on. Some people rumor that Ebola and maybe AIDS and a few other type of terrible viruses or diseases like it maybe came out of a military biolab, that it was actually a weapon. That's something to think about, especially in context of it didn't really exist before the 1970s, and these things all cropped up at about the same time in the same place in Africa, and there's no cure for them. Oh, and suddenly they pulled a rabbit out of the hat. Normally these things take many years of huge amounts of funding. None of the big pharmaceutical companies were able to come up with a cure. Oh, suddenly a very small research company in San Diego has got this potential cure. It just doesn't make sense. So there's some funny stuff going on here for sure. Global pandemic mass die-off. This fits in with a lot of scary globalist, powerful people, New World Order types that want to have a population reduction event. And politically, if you think about politically who's in control and what they really want, it fits that agenda perfectly, which is very scary and frightening. So you need to do your own personal preps about being able to kind of bug in, shelter in place, and maybe bug out if this thing shoots around, and if you're not able to get the serum or whatnot. As far as getting the flu shot for this winter, normally I try to avoid the flu shot. I think I'm going to get one because they said it has flu-like symptoms on Ebola. Frankly, I don't want to come down with the flu and be misdiagnosed as maybe having Ebola and then put in a quarantine. So normally I try to avoid vaccines and whatnot because of the downside risks and the dangers, which are pretty well documented. But I'm probably looking at getting a flu shot this season sooner than later before all the doses run out. We only got about doses for about half the people in the United States, usually like 150 or 200 million. They don't make enough vaccine for everybody because not everyone's going to buy it and take it. So I'd say this season for flu season, getting the flu shot is probably a good idea, given that the Ebola virus, they said the symptoms were very much flu-like, especially in the beginning, when the first symptoms. So as far as the quarantine situation, again, they have not really enforced it very well. If you look at what happened in West Point, we talked about in our previous video about West Point, and yeah, there it is, quarantine. So Liberia will lift the quarantine. What was ineffective, people were breaking through it, as we predicted. We talked about that in a prior video, that this would be an ineffective quarantine. The people would not be incentivized to, there were too many riots there. They couldn't enforce it. Not because, they're not ending it because nobody inside has got Ebola, right? It didn't even get through 21 days like they were supposed to. They were going to try to quarantine it for 21 days, see who had Ebola. They simply don't have enough supplies, and it was ineffective as we said it would be. They handled it in the wrong way. It was the right idea, but done the wrong way, and it was just done on a poor community. So that's that situation. Again, the long-term outcomes on this thing is going to be like a ZMAP type solution with something like that. They said it did pretty well on the monkey tests. Some people that were given it, the two doctors that came to the United States, recovered. The doctor and the nurse, and the priest that went to Spain unfortunately died. He was given it. I think he was unfortunately pretty far along. Map Bio is the company that makes I think ZMAP. So Map Bio and the ZMAP pharmaceutical product. And they're a tiny hole in the wall type company. So you got to figure out how is it possible these guys, and they are nothing. How did they come up with the thing? If you want to get more information on our predictions, check out our website, forecastgear.com. We've got an analysis on correct forecast trends and recommendations that were correct. There's a very quickly growing number of them. Check out our Twitter. Check us out on Twitter for sure. Got a lot of important information going on there. As far as what the outcome of a global pandemic will likely be, do some research on it. This map is wildly optimistic. I mean, they basically say a death rate of 100 people out of 100,000 on this map here. That's not the death rate on Ebola, guys. It's 50 to 90%. Okay, and if they can't quarantine it, when it shoots around and go crazy, it's going to impact everybody in the world eventually. At that point, the only way is they're going to force everybody to take this vaccine, and that'll be the only other solution. This thing is almost playing out like a scenario from this movie Contagion. And the way Ebola is shooting around, I mean, it is almost right out of the theme to this movie. And I'd say this movie is pretty accurate in talking about, if you look at bubonic plague, the Black Plague that happened in Europe, as a historical parallel on this thing, it had a mass casualty rate. So you look at the Black Plague, bubonic plague situation, and also the influenza back in the turn of about 100 years ago, around World War I. And look at this thing. It's all tied together. And influenza happened with World War I. A lot of people say we're heading into World War III right now. That would be an interesting part of the exacerbation. So do your own homework. Try to review our thing. We got a website or a movie on YouTube about doing preps for Ebola. Please see that. It's got good information. Please do your own research also on prepping for this thing, because it's likely that we're going to see the following situations play out. We're going to see probably 2 and 3, a mixture of 2 and 3. Some medicines will be available to help reduce this thing, but it's not going to help everybody. And at this point, it looks like it's headed toward going global in a big way. A lot of people are going to be impacted by this thing, and it's going to be a game changer when it hits. Please watch that movie, Pandemic or Contagion. And again, they have not been on the ball doing the quarantine and the drastic measures we recommended. We said that if they don't implement those drastic measures, it's going to go pandemic, and that's where this thing's headed. Thanks so much for watching. Stay safe, and please subscribe to us. Thanks so much.